I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless.
His name was Bruce Lee, born in San Francisco on November 27, 1940. In the Year of the Dragon, a detail his mother Grace would later consider deeply significant. In Chinese culture, the dragon symbolizes power, good fortune, and transformation, and in ways that no one could have predicted. That symbolism would prove uncannily accurate. The world would come to know him by a different name, Bruce Lee, martial artist, actor, philosopher, cultural icon, a man whose life lasted only 32 years, yet whose influence stretched across generations, continents, and disciplines. But to understand Bruce Lee, truly understand him, you must go back to the beginning, to the streets of Hong Kong, to a mother's
and Chinese boxing, to James Garner, Steve McQueen, Lee Marvin, and James Coburn. The newest Mandarin superstar, known in the
prayers, a father's stage lights, a boy
known in the West for his appearances in Batman, The Green Hornet, Ironside, and Longstreet. His name is Bruce Lee, and he doesn't even...
Within months, the family sailed back to Hong Kong, and that is where Bruce Lee's real story truly begins. Hong Kong in the 1950s was a city of contradictions, a British colony rooted in ancient Chinese traditions, rapidly modernizing yet deeply conservative, energetic, yet uncertain about its own identity. In many ways, it was the perfect environment for a boy like Bruce, who would spend his entire life existing between worlds. Lee Hui-Chuan was a famous man in Hong Kong's entertainment world, and young Bruce grew up surrounded by performers, artists, and storytellers. The family lived in relative comfort, far removed from the desperate poverty that gripped many Hong Kong residents in the post-war years. Bruce attended La Salle College.
Doesn't even speak Mandarin. And here's Pierre.
Well, how can you play in Mandarin movies if you don't even speak Mandarin? How do you do that?
A prestigious Catholic school, and later St. Francis Xavier's College. He was considered a reasonably bright student, but his attention frequently wandered far from textbooks. What consumed Bruce was the streets. Hong Kong's neighborhoods were alive with gang rivalries, territorial disputes, and constant low-level violence. School gangs were common, boys forming tight-knit groups for protection and identity. Bruce was not immune to this world. By his early teenage years, he had earned a reputation as a fighter. He was fearless, sometimes reckless, always ready to prove himself. His parents worried. He was getting into street fights, and he was losing some of them. It was Bruce's father who made the decisive intervention, concerned that his son was heading toward serious trouble, or worse. Lee Hui-Chuan arranged for Bruce to begin formal martial arts training. In 1953, at the age of 13, Bruce was introduced to IP Man, a Grand Master of Wing Chun Kung Fu. IP Man was a remarkable figure, a small...
Well, first of all, I speak only Cantonese.
Yeah.
So, there is quite a difference as far as pronunciation.
elegant man of quiet authority who had fled mainland China after the Communist Revolution in 1949. He had settled in Hong Kong and opened a school, and his reputation among serious martial artists was immense. Wing Chun, the style he taught, was distinctive. It emphasized close-range combat, economy of motion, simultaneous attack and defense, and the development of sensitivity and reflexes over raw physical power. It was not the spectacular hike-inking style that most people imagined when they thought of Kung Fu. It was precise, direct, and ruthlessly efficient. For Bruce, these early years under IP Man were transformative in ways that went far beyond learning to fight. He was introduced, for the first time, to the philosophical dimensions of martial practice, the idea that training the body was inseparable from training the mind. IP Man was not simply teaching Bruce how to punch. He was teaching him how to think, how to observe, how to remain calm under pressure. Bruce trained obsessively. While other boys were relaxing on weekends, he practiced Wing Chun drills for hours, developing muscle memory and timing that would eventually make him one of
pronunciation and things like that going.
So somebody else's voice is used, right? For
Definitely, definitely.
You just make the words. Doesn't that sound strange?
The fastest human beings ever filmed. Fellow students remembered him as driven, sometimes impatient, always hungry to improve. He had a gift for learning and an equal talent for questioning what he learned. There is a story, perhaps apocryphal, perhaps true, that IP Man once showed Bruce a technique and told him to stop thinking and simply feel. Bruce, whose mind was always racing, struggled with this instruction. He was a boy who wanted to analyze, to understand the mechanics of every movement. IP Man reportedly sent him home for a week, telling him to meditate on water. The lesson would stay with Bruce for the rest of his life. But there was trouble ahead. At some point during his years with IP Man, Bruce's fellow students discovered something that disturbed them. Bruce Lee was of mixed heritage. His maternal grandmother was half German. In 1950s Hong Kong, where ethnic identity carried enormous social weight, this revelation caused friction. Some of IP Man's senior students objected to teaching a mixed-race student the
I have to find like something similar to that and keep a kind of a feeling going behind that.
secrets of traditional kung fu. IP Man, to his credit, refused to stop teaching Bruce, but Bruce was wounded by the prejudice, and it planted early seeds of doubt about rigid traditions and closed systems. Before any of this, Bruce had already begun another life entirely, one that would eventually define him globally. Because his father was a film actor, and the family was well connected to Hong Kong's Cantonese film industry, Bruce appeared in his first film at the age of 3 months, carried on screen by his father. By the time he was a teenager, he had appeared in numerous Cantonese films as a child actor, most famously in the 1950 film The Kid, where he starred opposite his father. Acting came naturally to Bruce.
Something that matching the Mandarin do.
Like the
Does
old
it
silent
sound complicated?
days. Like the old silent days. But I gather in the movies made here, the dialogue is pretty stilted anyway.
Yeah,
He had his father's charisma, a magnetic screen presence, and an intuitive understanding of how to hold an audience's attention. The camera loved him. It captured something electric in his eyes, a combination of intelligence, intensity, and warmth that was difficult to define but impossible to ignore. By the late 1950s, however, Bruce's street fighting had escalated to the point where his parents feared genuine legal consequences. Following a particularly serious fight, some accounts suggest, it involved a boy from a rival gang family with connections to the police. A difficult decision was made. In 1959, at 18 years old, Bruce Lee,
because most of the Mandarin picture done here are dubbed anyway.
They dubbed anyway.
Anyway, I mean disregard. I mean they shoot without sound.
was put on a ship to the United States. Bruce arrived in San Francisco with roughly $100, his American citizenship, and his Wing Chun training. He briefly stayed with friends of his father's, working odd jobs, teaching cha-cha lessons, a dance he had mastered in Hong Kong, and giving martial arts demonstrations wherever he could find an audience. Within months, he made his way north to Seattle, Washington, where he finished high school and enrolled at the University of Washington. At the University of Washington, Bruce studied philosophy, a choice that surprised those who knew him only as a fighter, but made complete sense to those who understood his restless, questioning mind. He immersed himself in Western philosophy, reading Descartes, Hegel, and Krishnamurti, alongside Chinese classical texts. He was
I agree with you. I mean, see, to me, a motion picture is motion.
Yeah.
I mean, you gotta keep the dialogue.
Fascinated by the relationship between thought and action, between abstract principle and lived experience. He kept extensive personal journals, notebooks filled with reflections, diagrams, training notes, and philosophical musings that scholars would later mine for insights into his extraordinary mind. In Seattle, Bruce also began formally teaching martial arts, at first informally in parking lots and parks. Then, at a small school, he established
Sound. So it doesn't, make any difference.
Your lips never quite make the right words, do they?
Yeah, well, that's where the difficulty lies, you see. I mean,
that he called the the Junfan Kung Fu Institute. This was a significant step. Bruce was not simply passing on Wing Chun as he had learned it. He was already beginning to modify, question, and expand. He studied Western boxing, admiring its directness and economy. He examined fencing, borrowing footwork principles. He absorbed whatever he found useful. It was in Seattle that Bruce Lee met Linda Emery, a student at the university. Their relationship developed quietly at first. Linda was drawn to Bruce's energy and intensity.
Dialogue down to the minimum.
Did you look at many Mandarin movies before you started?
His combination of physical presence and intellectual depth. They married in August 1964 over the objections of Linda's mother, who worried about both cultural differences and Bruce's uncertain financial future. Their son Brandon was born in 1965, followed by daughter Shannon in 1969. In the summer of 1964, Bruce Lee attended the Long Beach International Karate Championships in California, not as a competitor, but as a demonstrator. What happened there would change the course of his life. Before an audience that included some of America.
Playing in the
Yes,
first
yes,
one.
yes.
What did you think of them when you saw them?
Quality-wise, I mean, I have to admit.
Top martial artists. Bruce performed demonstrations of extraordinary speed and precision. He showed a 2-finger push-up. He demonstrated the 1-inch punch, delivering devastating force from almost no distance. He defeated challengers with techniques so fast that spectators could barely
I
follow
mean, in order to, because the Cantonese have a different way of saying things, different from the Mandarin.
Yeah.
So,
them. In the audience that day was Jay Sebring, a celebrity hairstylist with connections throughout Hollywood. Sebring was transfixed by what he saw. He immediately thought of a producer friend who was developing a new
to admit that it's not quite up to the standard. However, it is growing, and it is
television series, a show that needed someone exactly like the young Chinese-American man performing on that stage. That producer was William Dozier. The show was called The Green Hornet. Bruce Lee moved his family to Los Angeles in 1964, and Hollywood appeared to be opening its doors. He landed a role as Kato, the chauffeur and partner of the masked vigilante in The Green Hornet, which premiered in 1966. As Kato, Bruce brought something entirely new to American television screens. Genuine martial arts performed at genuinely supernatural speed. Audiences were mesmerized. Children across America pretended to be Kato, not the Green Hornet. In Hong Kong, the show was broadcast as The Kato Show, a telling indicator of where audience loyalties lay. But despite this popularity,
it is getting higher and higher and going toward that standard, that what I would term quality.
They say the secret of your success in that
Hollywood's reception was deeply complicated by race. The entertainment industry of the 1960s had rigid, unspoken rules about who could be a leading man. Asian actors were given supporting roles, servants, villains, comic sidekicks, exotic background figures. The idea of an Asian man as a romantic lead, as the hero audiences were meant to identify with and root for, was, in the minds of most studio executives, simply unacceptable. Bruce experienced this firsthand. After The Green Hornet, he found himself trapped in a pattern of guest appearances and small roles. He appeared in Ironside Blondie, Here Come the Bride's capable performances in forgettable parts. He continued, teaching martial arts to Hollywood clients, building a roster that included Steve McQueen, James Coburn.
In that movie, The Big Boss, which was such a success here and rocketed you to stardom in Asia, was that you did your own fighting.
And Roman Polanski. He earned respect. He earned connections. But he could not seem to break through the invisible ceiling that race had placed above him. There is a particularly painful chapter in this period, the story of Kung Fu. Bruce Lee is widely believed to have been the creative inspiration for the television series that eventually aired in 1972, starring David Carradine as a half-Chinese martial artist wandering the American West. Bruce had developed a similar concept
As an expert in the various martial arts in China, what did you think of the fighting that you saw in the movies that you studied?
himself and pitched it to Warner Brothers Television. The studio was interested, but not in casting Bruce as the lead. Carradine, a white actor, got the role. Bruce was passed over in part, according to various accounts, because executives worried that American audiences would not accept an Asian lead. The bitterness of this rejection ran deep. But Bruce Lee was not a man who allowed disappointment to calcify into defeat. If American studios would not give him the platform he deserved, he would find that platform elsewhere. Throughout these difficult years, Bruce continued developing his martial arts philosophy with extraordinary intensity. He was reading voraciously philosophy, psychology, anatomy, biomechanics.
That you studied before you became a star.
Well, I mean, definitely in the beginning I had no intention.
He was training with an obsessiveness that alarmed even his closest friends, sometimes working out for 8 or more hours a day. And he was thinking deeply about the nature of combat, the nature of expression, and the nature of human potential. The philosophy he developed during this period crystallized into what he called Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. The name was deliberately provocative, a way, a do in Japanese.
Or whatsoever, that what I was practicing and what I'm still practicing now would lead to this.
In Chinese, traditionally referred to a codified system of practice with defined techniques, hierarchies, and rules. Bruce was creating something that defied those definitions from the start. Jeet Kune Do was not a style. It was, as Bruce described it, the absence of style. Or more precisely, it was the art of using whatever works. If Wing Chun's close-range strikes were effective, use them. If Western boxing's footwork offered advantages, adopt it. If wrestling's ground techniques solved a problem that standing arts couldn't, learn them. The question was never, is this kung fu? The question was always, does this work? This was radical thinking. The martial arts world of the 1960s was intensely territorial, with practitioners of different styles maintaining that their system was superior. Cross-training was considered a form of betrayal. Masters guarded techniques jealously. Bruce found all of this profoundly limiting.
Yeah, I know.
To begin with. But martial art has a very, very deep meaning as far as my life is concerned.
And said so, publicly, and without apology. It made him enemies. It also made him a visionary. By December 1971, Bruce Lee was at a crossroads. In the United States, he remained on the margins of the industry he had hoped to conquer. In Hong Kong, the situation was reversed. His 2 most recent films, The Big Boss and Fist of Fury, had shattered box office records. He had become the biggest movie star in Asia almost overnight. Canadian journalist Pierre Burton, conducting interviews in Hong Kong, secured a sit-down with this man who was becoming a phenomenon. What Burton expected was a conversation
concerned because as an actor, as a martial artist, as a human being,
about movies and martial arts. What he got was something considerably more profound. Bruce Lee, sitting across from the camera in a dark turtleneck, spoke with the calm intensity of a man who had thought very carefully about everything he was about to say. He talked about identity, what it meant to be Chinese and American simultaneously, to belong fully to neither world. He talked about authenticity, the danger of performing a version of yourself rather than simply being yourself. He talked about the nature of combat and the nature of life, and then he delivered the words that would echo for decades. Empty your mind.
All these I have learned from martial art.
Maybe for our audience who doesn't know what it means, you might explain exactly what you mean by martial.
Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend. These sentences, simple on their surface, inexhaustible in their depth, had been decades in the making. They were the distillation of everything Bruce had learned in Hong Kong alleys, in IP Man's school, on American university campuses, in Hollywood rejection letters, in thousands of hours of solitary training in philosophical reading. The origin of the water metaphor traced back to a moment of crisis and revelation from his youth. Frustrated one day with his inability to grasp a concept, consumed by the same intense
Martial art.
Right. Martial art include all the combative arts like karate or
analytical mind that was both his greatest strength and his greatest obstacle. Bruce had gone sailing alone off the coast of Hong Kong. In anger, he punched the ocean. The water gave way instantly, absorbed the blow completely, and reformed without a scar. He punched again. The same response. Perfect yielding, perfect recovery. In that moment, something shifted. He understood, viscerally and not merely intellectually, what his teachers had been trying to tell him about the nature of real strength.
or karate, judo, Chinese kung fu or Chinese boxing, whatever you call it. All those. You see, like Aikido, Korean.
Water does not resist. Water yields, and in yielding, it is never defeated. It flows around any obstacle. Given enough time, it dissolves the hardest stone. When it needs to, it crashes with overwhelming, irresistible force. It has no fixed shape, yet it is always, completely, water. For Bruce, this was not simply a poetic observation. It was a comprehensive model for how to live. A person who clings rigidly to one identity, one system, one way of doing things becomes brittle, capable of breaking when life shifts, as it always does. A person who remains fluid, who can adapt to circumstances, fill any container, flow around barriers, and strike with force when the moment
I can go on and on and on, but it's a combative form of fighting. I mean, it's not, some of them became sport, but
requires is nearly impossible to defeat. He had applied this principle to martial arts, building Jeet Kune Do on the foundation of adaptability rather than orthodoxy. Now, in the Burton interview and in his journals, he was extending it to every dimension of human experience: career, identity, relationships, creativity, all demanded the same fluid intelligence. When Bruce Lee returned to Hong Kong in 1971, it was not as a refugee from Hollywood failure, but as a man who had made a strategic decision. Raymond Chow, head of the newly formed Golden Harvest production company, had offered Bruce unprecedented creative control and a far more generous financial arrangement.
some of them are still not. I mean, they use, for instance, kicking to the groin, jabbing fingers at the eyes and things like that.
The world. He changed how we fight. He changed how we make films. He changed how we think about identity, about cross-cultural belonging, about the relationship between East and West. He planted a philosophical seed, simple, elemental, rooted in the observation of nature that continues to grow and branch in directions he never could have imagined. In a world of accelerating change, of disrupted industries and shifting identities and unprecedented uncertainty, his central insight feels more relevant than ever: the ability to adapt, to remain genuinely open, to flow rather than resist. This is not weakness. This is the deepest and most durable form of strength. Be water, my friend.